I have a just desire to alleviate suffering in people if I can, and to provide them the best care possible. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
What was it about treating anxiety and OCD that was so interesting to you?
It fit my personality, especially the type of therapy that it was, where the therapy is you have to face your fears. You have to be in the experience and learn how to handle it. It is not about promising you that you're going to be fine and everything will be okay. It's about knowing that you have the skills and the ability to handle things. And we were married for a year, and then she started to have various symptoms. We found out about the cancer, and I remember looking at that first scan and I just thought, she's dead. There's no coming back from that. I had to really apply to myself everything that I was teaching other people to do. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Get to Know OCD podcast, brought to you by Know OCD. Know OCD is an online platform for the treatment of obsessive compulsive and related conditions. If you're interested in finding out more about Know OCD, go to knowcd.com or treatmyocd.com. And if you're interested in getting more episodes of this podcast, subscribe to the Know OCD YouTube channel. I'm very excited because today, Tia Wilson is with us. Hi, Tia.
Hello, Patrick. Good to be here.
Well, so good to have you, and I cannot wait. I have so many questions for you to ask.
So about that,
About
actually,
what?
I was thinking, since we've been hearing from you a lot, we've been hearing you ask a lot of questions, but not actually getting to hear your story, I think we should switch chairs and I'm going to interview you so that our audience can get to know who you are and why they should care.
I'm being bamboozled.
You're being bamboozled, so switch me seats.
All right. I've never been on this side. This will be interesting. Okay. All right. Well, let's see where we go.
Is the grass greener?
Well, it is quite the different view. That is for sure. Yeah. Wow. Oh, look at all that. Anyway.
Okay. Well, so you didn't just spawn already knowing everything you know about OCD.
I was born this way.
Where were you born? Tell us about that. Where were you born? Where are you from? How did you grow up?
Born in Chicago, Illinois, and raised from a North Sider mom and a South Sider dad, which was interesting for food choices or even baseball teams or things of that nature as well too. And it was great. Have a sister as well. She's 3 years younger than me, and did all of my grade school and high school in Chicago as well.
And what sort of kid were you? Like, how did your teachers describe you?
Well, I think that changed over time. First grade, and I'm going to, all right, I will be very open here
tell us
about
the
some
truth.
things. So kindergarten, I seem to have done well, but I then went to a private school for grade school, and you had to test in, and I don't think I tested in very well, because when I got into first grade, there were the really cool kids. They were the Cardinals. Okay. And then there was the second group. They were the Blue Jays. They were almost as cool, but not quite. Then seemed to be the average kids, who were the Robins. And I, along with 4 other people, was a sparrow.
Sparrow.
I was a sparrow, yes. We kind of sat off in the corner and were mostly ignored for the entire first grade class. I think the assumption was we weren't going to amount to much at all. And it was really, really rough, actually. I actually threw up every day of first grade for the first semester. But
oh my gosh.
Maybe one of the reasons I do the therapy that I do is because my mom turned out to be a bit of a behavioral therapist, because they would call home and say he threw up again. And my mom would say, well, does he have a fever? And they would say, no. And then she would say, okay, you can keep him. And she would hang up the phone, and she would never come to get me. And I just had to figure out how to deal with whatever my anxieties and my fears were at school.
So you kind of got thrown into exposure and response prevention yourself, like having to navigate that.
Yeah, only about 8 years after ERP was invented was I doing ERP. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, so then as you grew up, like what sort of things did you like to do? What were your hobbies? What were some of the interests you had?
We had a conglomerate of Irish families that lived in the neighborhood. So it was the all the Irish kids hanging out with each other, playing tag and hide and seek and kickball and wiffle ball and doing all of those things. And every summer, the big family treat was to go up to South Haven, Michigan, to a resort called Sunnybrook Farm.
Okay.
And that was the highlight of the year, the 1 week that you would spend at Sunnybrook, where the kids could be with the kids and the adults would be with the adults, and you barely saw your parents for a week, and you just hung out and did a bunch of stuff, like run in the sand dunes and go on hay rides and have campfires and play volleyball and shuffleboard and eat all the food you could. It was amazing.
That sounds incredible. I love the lack of adult supervision.
Yes.
You mentioned your Irish heritage. Was that a big part of your upbringing, or?
Yeah, it really, really was. Many stereotypical Irishness in my family. We had a lot of priests and nuns or police officers in the family. Okay. So, and then also kind of church-affiliated things too. My grandfather ran the Chicago Catholic cemeteries for Chicago as well. So one of my uncles was a editor for U.S. Catholic Magazine, and my dad had even been in the seminary for a while, thought about being a priest too. Yeah.
Wow.
So very stereotypical family that I grew up in.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then what, as you're growing up, you go to high school, you get into college, kind of what were your goals maybe as a career or as a kid, and how did they shift as you went through college?
Well, it was interesting. In probably sophomore year, some of my buddies from high school had gone to a concert and met a couple of people, and I remember meeting those folks mostly over the phone and just talking to people that I'd never actually met physically. And for a while, people would start calling the house saying, I talked to someone who said they talked to you and that you were really helpful talking to them, and I'm wondering if I could talk to you. And I would say, okay. I kind of felt like Lucy from the Peanuts with my 5 cents, please. Yeah. And I started to kind of do sessions in high school in my sophomore and junior year. And in fact, junior year was when call waiting was invented, and my dad and mom got it, and my dad sat me down and said, listen, if I'm leaving work and I'm calling home and you're on the phone, all I've gotten is a busy signal up until now. So going forward, if you hear that beep for the call waiting, you better answer it. Otherwise, you're not doing these therapy sessions anymore with anybody. So I was like, okay, Dad. So call waiting came into the house. And
what were some of the things they were calling about? Like, what were some of the high school problems?
It was everything that you would see today, and slightly different without the social media component of it, but people who were sad or depressed or relationship breakups or just didn't feel like they fit in or had been teased or something like that, which to me really fit because that had kind of happened to me. I was a nerdy kid. I had a lot of acne and allergies. So I would sneeze and blow my nose a lot and had some zits and just kind of didn't fit in all that great. And it was not very fun, right? Yeah. There was even some bullying that happened in grade school. One kid even who had attacked me and poured tear gas in my face at one point. And, I remember even at that point of my life thinking, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. If this is what life is going to look like for me, I don't like this, and this is not what I want. But that was also coming toward high school, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get out of this grade school and away from a lot of this, and I'm going to be able to start my life over again. And so I'm going to give high school a try. And if it works, I'll stick around. And if it doesn't, I don't know what's going to happen. And I went to high school and I met some amazing friends that I'm still best friends with today. Yeah. And it changed my life. And as nerdy as it sounds, I even joined band, which was one of the best things I ever did. A trombone. Yeah, I was a trombone player. Cool. But I found another group of people to hang with and that I could identify with that I'd never really felt that I'd had before. And also with high school and those best friends that I have developed an interest in gaming. I mean, we played Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of other stuff. And I found people.
Yeah,
right?
community.
I found community.
Yeah.
And to this day, those people I played D&D with when I was 14 years old, we still get together and play different games today. And that's 40 years later, the next year.
Yeah.
So that was the best. That was the best. And then in high school, I feel like I just kind of grew into who I am, right? I developed confidence that I'd never had before. And I decided that I was going to go to college and be a psychology major.
So obviously the choice to be a psychology major was probably very influenced by your experience in high school.
It was.
What did it mean to you to be able to be there for people who are going through maybe that same isolation that you had been feeling?
It still drives the work that I do today because I have a just desire to alleviate suffering in people if I can, and to provide them the best care possible. And, as weird as it is to think about now, back then, there really wasn't therapy back then. There were no therapists in schools or anything like that. And I definitely think I could have benefited from those types of things, but I was just really on my own for a lot of that stuff. And I think some of the things that I did for myself are the stuff that I still do today for people. And again, I go back to that influence of, when I was throwing up in school and my mom didn't come get me, I had to figure it out. And that has kind of been what I've tried to do and teach people to do ever since then, is how do you go and figure this out? And so when I went to college and majored in psychology, I had just the notion that I was going to be a psychologist and this is what I would do for the rest of my life.
And did you know you wanted to specialize in OCD, or was it
No.
more broad at that point? Okay.
My goal in life at that point, once I was in graduate school, was I was going to be a college counseling center therapist. I would have my summers off and I would help people figure out what they wanted to major in and just the adjustment period of life that college is.
Yeah.
And so I did my internship at a college counseling center, which was great. And then I did a postdoc, and that's what changed my life, because I did my postdoc at the St. Louis Behavioral Medicine Institute under the direction of Alec Pollard, who's a leader in the field of anxiety and OCD, who to this day is one of my best friends in the entire world and still a mentor to me. And I was there for about a week and a half, and I realized this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I gave up on the college thing and knew that I was going to treat anxiety disorders and OCD forever.
What was it about treating anxiety and OCD that was so interesting to you, or that made you want to stick with it?
It fit my personality, especially the type of therapy that it was, where the therapy is, again, what I'd had to do for myself, which was you have to face your fears. You have to be in the experience and learn how to handle it. It is not about promising you that you're going to be fine and everything will be okay. It's about knowing that you have the skills and the ability to handle things. And it won't always go great and it won't always feel good, but that's all right. Nobody gets a guarantee in life that this is going to be an easy ride.
Yeah. I know one of your favorite compliments, and one of my favorite compliments I hear about you is members when they say, you don't have OCD.
Right.
Why does that mean so much to you? Or why do you think that people are able to relate to you and you're able to relate to the experience of OCD despite not having it yourself?
I think I've figured out the nature of OCD, and I describe this a lot. And sometimes I use the example of Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
No matter what happens, she's picking that football up and he's going flying through the air.
Yeah.
And there was an interview with Charles Schultz, and he said, it's the nature of Lucy to pull up the football every time. Charlie Brown will never kick the football. And I thought about that, and I thought about what is the nature of OCD? And I figured out OCD will always do these things. And so I can work with people who have OCD and I can describe to them what's probably gone on in their head and the things they've thought before they even tell me. And they look at me like, how do you know? And my answer is always the same, because that's the nature of OCD and that's what it does. And it doesn't really vary much between people. It's just the way that it is. Yeah, or themes.
Right? Like that's still how I recognize when my OCD is latching onto something, even if it's never latched onto that thing before. It's the same pattern. It's the same way that it's interacted with every other aspect or every other theme.
Right.
And so it's the same pattern, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is an amazing compliment when people say they can't believe I don't have OCD because I think like I have OCD. But it's because I've tried to really bring in what is the nature of OCD and look at the world through that view of, this is how OCD would see this situation. And if I can bring that into a therapy session and help somebody with that, then they feel like they're really understood.
So what are some other, you talked about throwing up as a kid and having the ERP element of that, but what were some other things you've experienced in your life where you've maybe had to take the approach like it was the nature of OCD?
Yeah. I mean, the most recent one was the death of my wife. Mm-hmm. When we got married, and you get married and you think in sickness and in health, and nobody says, I'll take the sickness, everybody wants the health. And we were married for a year, and then she started to have various symptoms. So first she had a hysterectomy, then she had a lumpectomy, then she had a craniotomy, and all these tumors were appearing in her body, and we couldn't figure out why and what was happening. And then finally one of her doctors, after some pain she was experiencing, ordered a scan, and that's when we found out about the cancer. And I remember looking at that first scan, and I just thought, she's dead. That's it. There's no coming back from that. And I had to really apply to myself everything that I was teaching other people to do, or else I would have been a hypocrite, number one, and I don't want to be that. But I had to deal with the guilt and the shame of it as well, too, because it's really hard to say to someone who's dying, I'm going to go play golf.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, yeah.
Because I feel like an ass,
of course.
I'm going to go have some fun. But everybody was really good at prodding me into that too, saying, you still have to take care of yourself in addition to taking care of her. So the deal I always worked out is I would have someone else come over to be with her, so she wasn't alone. She would have people there to talk to and connect with, but I could go and let my guard down a little bit and recharge the batteries and just get away from the house or from her for a while and just do things for me that would kind of bring me some energy back into my life that I could then bring back into the home that we were living in, because our home turned into a hospital.
Right.
We had oxygen tanks and hospital beds and tables and we had, shelves had lost all the stuff that was on them and now held medicines and medical supplies and everything. And we did that for 6 years.
And I'm sure, maybe not intrusive thoughts, but you're experiencing a lot of distressing thoughts as this time is going on.
And I've even said to patients, there were days I was hoping she would die. And I don't say that under just, I'm so sick of you, die. But
of course.
I watched her pain and suffering, and I thought, gosh, just please go, because this is not getting better. She would, there was months where at about 10:30 at night, she would just out of nowhere start screaming because one of the tumors would flare up in her shoulder. And she was crying, and I'm trying heat, cold, everything, just here's meds, here's patches, all this kind of stuff. And when it's bone tumors, there's not a lot you can do. It just hurts.
No.
And so there were days I just thought, I hope maybe you don't wake up tomorrow so that you don't have to suffer anymore, because it was just grueling to see what she was going through. It was terrible.
You've talked a lot about like the pain and difficulty of being a caregiver. Yeah. And you've spoken to some of our members and their families about that as well. Because, we know OCD doesn't just affect the person experiencing it, but all those around them. Same, when it's something like a terminal illness. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about like what it looked like beyond the distress of seeing her in pain, what it looked like in your life to be, trying to take care of yourself at the same time.
This surprises people sometimes when I say it, but I loved COVID. I thought COVID was the greatest thing that ever happened, only because everyone had to live like I was living. And I know how selfish that sounds, and I get it. And I look back now, and I didn't love COVID in reality.
Sure.
But at the time when it hit, and Susan and I were already living like COVID was in existence. Because we didn't go out anymore, and we didn't hang out with people, and we didn't do fun things, and we didn't get to go visit other people's homes and go to parties and things like that. So once COVID came and everybody else was not doing those things too, I finally kind of, and Susan did too, felt like, all right, we're not missing out anymore, because now everybody's having to live like we're living.
Yeah. No, yeah, COVID kind of made everyone's world a little smaller.
Yeah.
And that's what grief does. That's what OCD does. It
Yep.
just kind of shrinks the world around you
Yep.
until you just kind of feel closed in,
Yeah.
right? And so I can understand that feeling. I'm not the only one who's
Yeah.
closed in. I know people with OCD have talked about that with COVID too, of like,
Yeah.
oh, people are kind of understanding for the
Right.
first time what it feels like to live this isolated, closed off, world.
Yeah, because cancer closes your world down too.
Yeah.
So when that happened, people reached out more because now, and I want to say this in the nicest way, but nobody knows how to really interact with you once something like this happens, right?
Yeah.
People that have been in your lives for very long, sometimes pull away.
Sure.
And don't know what to ask or.
Yeah, we're not taught in school
No.
how to help someone grieve or how to hold space for something that feels so heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'll tell you, who was amazing was my patients because they got it. And I was very open with them. I would say, hey, listen, just in case I have to miss a session because I got to take Susan to a doctor or a hospital or if something happens. And every session they would always ask at some point, how are you doing? How's your wife doing? And boy, the empathy that I felt back from the patients that I had, the members that we have at Know OCD, that was amazing, and that was really supportive as well too. And I'm always thankful. Even today they check in on me and say, how are you doing? How's it coming? And sometimes more so than people that have been in your life for decades do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you've been really open about the grief.
Yeah.
And with the Know OCD team, like we've, heard from you and so have the members. And I know there's a role of self-disclosure and a line in self-disclosure.
Yeah.
When it comes to being in a clinical role like you, where do you feel like you draw that line and why is it that you choose to be so open?
I'm a person.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not just somebody on the other side of a screen.
Yeah.
I'm a human being who has faults and issues and sorrows and tragedies and
I know about
joys.
your faults.
Yeah, well,
I know very well about your faults.
Everyone knows. All the people at Know OCD know the faults. But if I'm not a real person, why would they trust me to work with me?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not just some figurehead. I'm real. And if I can find stories or inspirations for people that are helpful to them, I want to share those things with people.
Yeah.
And I want it to be, I don't ever want to say to someone, oh, I get it, if I've never experienced it. I just think that's disingenuous, So I think I've gone through enough things that I can say I get it and genuinely mean it. Now, again, I don't have OCD. So I'm never going to be able to say to someone with OCD, oh, I get what it's like to live with OCD. But again, for me, understanding the nature of OCD, I can at least say to someone, I get how your brain's working. Yeah. I get what's going through your head. I may not fully ever understand the emotional component to it, but I do know what's going on in there, and I can help you with that.
Yeah. I often remind people with OCD of the fact that it is a human condition, meaning it's based in emotions that other people do understand. Sometimes people with OCD feel like they are, their own breed of human and they don't have any sort of like connection to other people and other people can't understand them. But it's important to know a lot of humans experience grief and anxiety and shame and all of the emotions that can come with OCD, even if they don't have them on the clinical level or have the intrusive thoughts and the compulsive piece to the extent that someone with OCD might. But being able to recognize, sometimes the distress and the way that comes not just through OCD, but through life and grief and pain and loss, I think can be very important for people who have OCD.
Absolutely. None of us, I think, gets out of here without an up and a down, right? And we can be amazingly cheerleading for people who are up, and we can be amazingly supportive for people when they're down. And fill in all the insides of that as well too. And with OCD, there's days you're doing well, right? And there's other days where you're going to have a flare up. And I want to be there for both of those.
Yeah.
To help people, cheerlead them when you're like, remember this day when you're doing well, because there's going to be a day in the future where you're going to be a downer. And I just want you to remember on that down day, you've been here as well too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you're in the middle of such intense emotions, it's easy to lose that perspective and feel like I'm always going to feel this way.
Of
right.
course.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we don't encourage you just to come to therapy when it's, really, really, really hard.
Right.
But to show up on the weeks where it's okay too, because we need to practice the skills during that time, right? We need to remember that this is a win and celebrate our wins so that when it gets more difficult, we still have those tools to kind of buoy us up, right?
And even for the people who are afraid to feel better, because then they are afraid to fall, because they know that there's going to be days where it's not feeling so
when
good.
is this going to, when is this happy feeling going to leave? It's any second,
right.
The panic.
So am I allowed to feel good, or should I even feel good? And yeah, because even without OCD, there's days that don't feel good too.
Yeah. And
sometimes I think that's hard for people to recognize, that feeling good and feeling down is a life, like you said, it's a life issue, right? It's not just OCD, it's not just panic, it's not just a phobia, it's a life issue, and we all go through something like that. And if everyone can learn that they can handle that, then we've been really successful in work.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. Did you experience some of that with your wife, where you'd have a good moment or some joyous time and feel maybe some of that, should I be feeling this? Or?
Yeah. There were even times where there'd be a minute or two where she was back to herself. You just, her eyes would clear up, her brain fog from all the medicines that she would be on would kind of clear for a moment, and you could have that 1 or 2 minutes of conversation that were just like, oh yeah, there, hey, and then she'd fall asleep again or something, and so you kind of look forward to those moments, right? You hope they're going to be there, but I think a big component is, imagine if I was disappointed every day that I didn't have one of those moments. Versus what I was trying to do was just celebrate the moments that I did have those times. And I could have gone either way. And I know that had I just been disappointed, I would have only been disappointed 98% of the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to live that way, and I don't want other people to live that way as well too. So I don't want the fact that you have an intrusive thought to make you think that the day's done, it's over, that's it. Because even if you don't have OCD, you're going to have intrusive thoughts, just so you know. So,
right.
So it's being able to say, all right, there was that. Sometimes there's a fly in the ointment, shall we say, but otherwise, the rest of the day wasn't ruined because of that, right? And the other piece too is, I don't know anyone who's ever had a perfect day. Meaning you didn't even stub your toe, right?
Sure.
I mean, that kind of thing. But when your goal is that, and there's anything that happens, therefore you feel like you've fallen short of your goal, to me, and what I hope I can do with the people I'm working with is, how can we find good, attainable, manageable goals and celebrate when we achieve them? And if we don't, figure out, okay, what can I do tomorrow to achieve it that I didn't do today?
Yeah. When you're always setting the bar so high, you never get the chance to be grateful, right? To just really settle into, we just had a good moment, because it wasn't the best moment, and so therefore it doesn't count at all, right? And I feel like that's one thing OCD likes to take away, is the feeling of gratitude, those feelings of those moments of, this is so lovely, and it doesn't have to mean anything. It doesn't have to change the trajectory of my life, right? It's just a moment I'm grateful for. Yeah. Right.
I mean, OCD removes anything positive if it can. I mean, my job is not, hey, it looks like your day's rough. How about some OCD? Right.
Right.
That's not what we suggest to anybody.
No.
It's quite the opposite. It's, hey, your day's rough. Is your OCD influencing that? And can we help to decrease the influence of the OCD so that maybe it's not such a rough day?
Yeah. So when you are working with patients and members and seeing that decrease in symptoms, How does that feel? Like what emotion are you feeling when you're watching these members have success?
I'm proud of them. I really am. I have a lot of pride in the people I work with who face these things, especially because of the fact that many of their friends or family have no idea the struggle that they're dealing with, right? Because as you know, if you think OCD is obsessive Christmas disorder or something we all have a little bit of, or wouldn't it be great to have a little OCD right now?
Right, I could finally clean my house. How great would that be? Hurrah!
If that's your way of thinking about OCD, then you are just absolutely out of it in terms of understanding what somebody is suffering with, right? So I try to bring a lot of pride and motivation into those sessions with people so that they recognize that someone is listening, someone's on their side, someone gets it, and someone is going to keep nudging them forward as well too.
Yeah. No, as you said, there's a problem of mass misinformation about what OCD is and a lot of stigma. When someone, let's say they see you're an OCD vest, they approach you on the street and have no context of OCD, how do you usually summarize the work you do or, what OCD is as a whole?
Yeah, I can't go to a party without telling people what I do and hear, oh, I have a little OCD.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the first thing I hear all the time. And so I say to people just a very quick thing. I hear that a lot, and I'm going to bet you have some quirky things that you do, right? Yeah, and I'm going to bet that they don't really interfere too much in your life. You might check your garage door twice before you leave or make sure the door's locked. But OCD is actually a little bit different. I say a little bit, but we know it's a ton. But I can't lay it on too thick with somebody, or else they're going to glaze over. I'll say OCD's different, though. It's actually a very serious thing where people do something like drive around the block to see if they've run someone over because they can't tell if it was a pothole or a body, or they spend hours trying to figure out every just existential and philosophical issue that's ever been brought up by the great philosophers for the last 2,000 years, thinking, how could I live my life without knowing the answers to these things? So as much as OCD may be portrayed in film or something like that as it helps solve crimes and it gets you the relationship, it's quite the opposite, and it's something that anybody with OCD would never wish on their worst enemy.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people to understand that it's not so much about the behaviors themselves, it's the reason why someone's doing it, right?
Yeah.
Someone can clean their room and have a dandy old time, whereas someone with OCD might be very distressed and having a lot of panicky fears about, if I don't do this, X, Y, and Z will happen, right?
Yep.
It's so much more about, what would happen if you didn't do that thing, and how would you feel? Because someone without OCD might say, I'd feel like I'd have a messy house, and that's the end of it. Whereas someone with OCD might say, I feel like my family might die, right? I think that's something I see as a big gap in information for people. If you had to choose one thing that the world knew about OCD that would make it easier for people with OCD, what would that one thing be?
It's not helpful, right? I remember during COVID watching a newscast, and all the newscasters were in one of the newscasters' backyard, and they were all 8-10 feet apart from each other. And they were saying how nice it was to be together. And one of the newscasters said, yeah, and wouldn't it be great if we all just had a little OCD? Then we'd make sure we wouldn't get COVID. And I remember wanting to throw something at the television first, but I refrained because I didn't want to break my TV. But I thought, we still have a lot of work to do. Because if the notion is that a serious mental health condition is helpful, we've got some priorities kind of screwed up here. We would never suggest, I don't know of any other condition we would say, hey, why don't you have some of this? I think it'll make your life better.
Did I tell you about the time someone thought when I said I was an OCD advocate that I advocated for people to get OCD?
Oh, well, that's fascinating.
He said, why do you want more people to have OCD? You're advocating to the extent you post about it online. It seems really weird. I was like, I don't even know how to start this conversation.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's interesting. So since we don't offer any other mental health conditions to people as a way to improve their lives, I'd like to get us to stop offering OCD as a way to improve lives as well too. Because as you know, someone living with OCD, I don't think it's enhanced your life.
I would say probably not.
I think we're in agreement on that one.
I don't think I have to think about that one much to say no.
No, not so much. Yeah. So that would be the education that I want to do with people, because then maybe individuals would realize how serious this actually is, and that it's not a laughing matter, and that people really suffer.
And how does that goal factor into the work you do? First of all, tell us about the work you do for us at NOCD, what that
Sure.
looks like for you. But how does that factor in?
I'm the chief clinical officer at NOCD, so the head therapist, psychologist, helping every team that I can to develop all of the policies, procedures, therapies that we can do to be of the best assistance to anybody with OCD. So our training team that trains our incoming therapists to make sure that our therapists have the best, most up-to-date information about OCD and exposure and response prevention therapy. What are the policies and procedures that make things run smoothly at the company so that everybody will get the therapy that they need? How do we set protocols for treatment, knowing that front-loading ERP with people will help them get better results quicker as well too over the course of time. And in general, being a support for our therapists as well, who have case consultation questions. And so to be able to assist them with their members and give them ideas about how to approach future therapy sessions and what to do. And then to educate people as well, like we do with this podcast, although you've bamboozled me today and taken over, so I'm not going to be doing that as much today. But to give an education to folks and to bring guests in as well too who have OCD, to put a face to OCD so that people really recognize it and understand it and know what's going on.
Yeah. You mentioned some of the really great improvements we're making in this space, more training for therapists, a lot more, hands-on education about what OCD looks like. How is that different from when you first started in the OCD space? Like, what improvements have we made as a whole, and where do we have yet to improve?
Yeah. Well, the beauty of teletherapy, I think, is amazing. And the fact that we can reach more people now is just incredible. Before, all OCD therapists who were really good specialists were located in major cities. Many did not take insurance. And so you had to drive hours to get to them and pay them cash. And now we have insurance coverage available, and all one needs is to be able to have an internet connection. Yeah. And you can provide that. So if we've helped to decrease the level of suffering in the world because of that, we're doing our job. And there's more to do. But
always.
I'm thrilled to be a part of that experience for people.
So for members who are maybe feeling stuck or feeling like they've failed in their therapy, what do you do to inspire them?
Well, going on the sparrow theme of my life, I will exactly. I will bring up the fact that on paper, I am a massive failure. So if you look at my applications, I graduated from a small college and thought I was the big cheese in the psychology department at my tiny little school. And so I applied to all of the top graduate programs in the country and was summarily rejected by every single one of them. And so that was 0 and 15. And so then I applied to some master's programs. I got into 2, and I went to one of them. And then I applied to another 15 graduate PhD programs, got into 2, so I went to one of those. Applied to 15 internships, got 1 offer, so I went to that one.
Was 15 your lucky number?
It was just kind of, it's what I could afford because you had to pay for it.
Yeah.
So I had a budget. That's about what I could do. And then I applied to 40 different jobs and postdocs, and I got 1 offer.
Wow.
And that was the one from the St. Louis Behavioral Medicine Institute. And that acceptance changed my life. Wow. And that acceptance is the reason why I do what I do today. And it was interesting. It was one of the funniest interviews I've ever had. Alec interviewed me, and we talked for 2 minutes about psychology. And then we talked for 28 minutes about why we both disliked the Chicago Cubs. And remember, I'm a North Side, South Side child, but my dad was the one who took me to baseball games, so we only went to White Sox games. So I was raised a White Sox fan, even though I lived on the North Side. And since he was in St. Louis and they were Cardinals, so they didn't like the Cubs at all. So we just talked about that. And years later, I remember asking him, it was one of the weirder interviews I ever had, what was up there? And he said, well, I knew that I could train you. I just had to know that I wanted to. Oh. Which I thought was awesome. And it's actually how I do interviews now as well, too, of I want to make sure that this is a person that I would want to work with and interact with and train. I know that I could teach you what you need to learn, but I want to make sure that you're the kind of person who was going to get along with everybody else here and fit
shares
in.
The values and the
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The value and is a real person as well too. Because if I had been robotic about that with Alec, I wouldn't have gotten the job. But I was I let my guard down and I was like, oh yeah, I can't stand the Cubs. Yeah. And hey, my first baseball game was Disco Demolition, you know, and he's like, oh my gosh. And we just hit it off. Right.
Yeah.
And if you can be a therapist and a real person at the same time, you've got the secret sauce, I think, to really being able to do this. Because in some ways as a therapist, we're many things. We're helping develop a treatment plan, but we're also going to be a coach and we're a motivator and we're a picker-upper if sometimes people don't do well, and we got to dust people off sometimes, and
a tough love
sometimes, and also a family therapist and a relationship counselor, and you have to be all of these different roles in order to be as helpful as possible, because it, as I'm sure you can attest, it's not just the person with OCD, it's the system that they're in as well too.
100%.
And I'm assuming your parents and siblings had to deal with your OCD as well too, not just you.
Oh, the whole country, the whole community, everyone was in on it.
Everybody knows.
Everybody, whether you know it or not, you were probably affected too.
I'm
somehow.
sure that I was. The butterfly effect of Tia.
Yes, no, 100%.
And so I always just want to be sure that therapy feels genuine to people, right? I don't want a robotic, let me just fill out a form and see how it is.
Sterile.
You've got to bring yourself and your personality into that experience. And that's what I enjoy doing too, is trying to be as real as possible in a therapy session. And too, it's why I do tell stories about my life and things I've gone through, because I don't want it to just be a one-sided experience. I want people, again, to know that, I've been through some shit too. Yeah. It's happened, right?
Well, that's one of my favorite things about ERP therapists is there's a wide range in terms of their approach. And sometimes people err on the side of tough love. And sometimes people are more of like the gentle. Yeah. And you can kind of decide what works for you.
Right.
And so I'm sure, you know, there are some people who might be like, I actually am needing more of this style and more of that. And that's part of the beauty of therapy.
Right.
Is finding the human, the therapist who works for you, who can help to really face your OCD with you, rather than just like somewhere you go and they just fix you, right? Yeah.
Some people want to work with me and some people are like, I need a little something different. I said, that's fine. Yeah. I know people who do it that way and let me refer you to them. Yeah. You know, I am not necessarily going to just change the way I do things. I mean, I have a leeway, obviously, but if there's truly something that's different than my approach, I'm going to help you find that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the cool things about NOCD is we have very comprehensive training and, like you said, lots of clinical supervision and making sure we're really consistent with really high quality standard of care, right? But at the same time, our therapists are humans and they have different approaches, and some are really funny in session and some are more serious, and people can kind of find, you know, what fits them while still making sure that they are getting a high quality care.
The beauty of being able to switch therapists and but keep a file between people and everything, you know, you don't lose anything, which is great. Yeah.
And for those people who are in therapy, or maybe they haven't even started therapy yet, but are recognizing they have OCD and starting to learn more, what advice do you have for someone with OCD?
To do the hard, difficult, tough work, right? I mean, this is not easy therapy. But it's rewarding. That's the good part, right? And so I would contend, going back to my, again, first grade experience, it wasn't easy to stay at school after throwing up all over the place. It was kind of embarrassing, actually.
Sure.
But I think it built in me almost like a stamina or a strength that I learned that I could handle that thing. And by the end of second grade, I'd moved up into the Blue Jays and the Cardinals groups, right? I just in building that confidence in myself, I stood up more for myself. I did the work, and I believed that I could do it as well too. And so that's what I hope for anybody with OCD, that as you go and you start facing life and doing things that you want to do and not the things that OCD wants you to do, you start to get the life back that you want and not living OCD's life anymore.
Beautifully said. I love that you said learn that you can handle it.
Well,
right?
yeah, that's the goal.
You're already capable. We
Yeah.
just got to teach you that you can, right?
That's the goal.
You're already aware.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining as well, too. This was the weirdest one for me, but thanks for being a part of the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you're interested in learning more about OCD or related conditions, check us out at NOCD.com or treatmyocd.com. And if you like this podcast, other than this one over here hosting it, kidding. If you like the podcast, join us on our YouTube channel at NOCD. So subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel. Thanks for joining. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time.